Greetings family, welcome to another edition of the Grenfell MediaWatch update. What happened last week? I want to call this one threats and tributes. So talking about threats, I'm going to start off with the announcements by Alison Saunders. She's the director of CPS, and she's announced that hate crime is now going to become a serious offence, escalated to the level of face-to-face hate crime. So if people start saying things on social media that's abusive, the police will treat it, or they'll be instructed to treat it, as if they've just said it to your face. So this change of approach in addressing hate crime is actually quite useful. It's quite timely, especially in line with some of the comments that have been said on social media about the Grenfell families. Especially if you think about what's happened in America recently, where you're seeing the incredible sight of white supremacists marching through towns with torches. The only thing they didn't have was pitchforks. So that's one good development. Okay, so what else happened this week? Of course. So the new terms of reference, after 500 extra submissions, after extra weeks of delay to make sure it's more inclusive, you're having responses from boroughs all over the UK. You're having people and families making the time to write down and to share their heartfelt views. The results are exactly the same. Theresa May has limited the scope of the inquiry to exactly what it was right at the beginning. And she's made a statement saying that, oh no, we're going to look at, trust me, we're going to look at social housing. That will be covered. But it's not written down. It's not officially part of the inquiry. And that's how they start to get out of these things. An addendum, something added to the back of the inquiry, or something running parallel, sidelining with no legal authority, will not make any change.
People have raised issues around social housing policy more widely, and this of course is an absolute priority for the Prime Minister and the government, and that is why I will be conducting a listening exercise across the country, talking to social housing tenants on issues where social housing policy has worked and where it hasn't worked.
I mean, take a look at where I'm going through right now. I mean, this is one of the most wealthiest countries in the world, and people are living in conditions, well, that just shouldn't be happening. There are enough resources to make sure that there are no homeless people. There are enough resources to make sure that everyone lives in safe and secure accommodation. What there isn't is the political will to do so, because it means that some people have to give up some of their privileges. Those people who are arguing that the issues of social housing can be dealt separately from the inquiry, they don't live in social housing.
Steve McQueen and Paul Newman.
I was actually watching a few scenes from Tower Inferno again. That's kind of like the perfect Hollywood idea of what would happen if there was a fire. So there's a moment in the film when you see the fire chiefs making policy on the fly, and they're gonna set off an explosion, and yes, it's going to kill people, but it might put out the fire. And you see the response from Steve McQueen.
Hey, Mike. Deputy wants to see you.
Those people are going to die up there if something's not done.
We might just have the answer.
The structural strength of the joists and risers up there in the promenade room, in my opinion, could definitely withstand the explosion.
What explosion? Chief, we've got the copter ready out on the plaza.
Fireman, wait a minute. We'll handle that. Just get back to your job.
Yes, sir.
This is what happened in Grenfell. You had fire chiefs, those in charge in management, telling firefighters to tell everyone to stay put. And now what's happening, the fact that the terms of reference for the inquiry has been, that's the point, it has been expanded a tiny bit to also include the London Fire Brigade. Now that that's happened, the chiefs are petrified. And now, they're saying that the inquiry's not looking wide enough. They're all concerned about their jobs, their futures, because they know deep down that their stay put policy was, well, it led to murder. Another thing that happened this week is the Evening Standard making sure that the families of the Manchester terror attack actually received £250,000 in compensation each. Now, for many people who may be thinking, what's that got to do with Grenfell? Well, actually, Grenfell is right in the heart of this. all the scrutiny of what happens with public funds after a disaster is now changing the way that organisations are starting to distribute money. It still hasn't fixed the situation with the Grenfell families who are still unhoused in permanent accommodation. It's an outrageous situation. But what we're seeing is another legacy effect. Okay, so that's some of the threats. Now let's look at the tributes. The first one that comes to mind is the amazing silent march that took place on the 14th. And that's going to take place every month. And I'm going to be there for the next march. And I've got to big up the families, because it's a way of ensuring that people can't forget. All that needs to happen, I suppose, is that the route sometimes needs to vary randomly. Basically, no matter where you move, people are making sure that it stays on the agenda, because that's what we have to do. At the National Slavery Memorial in Trafalgar Square, Ressa Sheba led a beautiful tribute in remembrance. And I've heard that there's going to be a tribute during Notting Hill Carnival, which there should be. I mean, I remember a few years ago I tried to institute something like that for our ancestors, and it was a disaster. I ended up being arrested calling for people to be silent in remembrance. Last week I also read a story from a head teacher who praised the actions of school children who actually took their exams while their homes were burning, while their friends were dying. I mean, there were 60 children who had to take exams in the area. 4 of them unfortunately passed away in the flames. Now, it's all very well praising the children for coming in and taking exams, but I was actually there the day afterwards, and I remember speaking to some young people who did not want to take exams on that day. They were petrified, they were mortified, they were so hurt. So, you know, I feel torn on this one. Yeah, we had to big up those students that went into school and took their exams. I mean, I hear stories about children doing homework from hospital beds, and you can call this the bulldog spirit, the thick upper lip and all that kind of nonsense. But they're children. And what I don't want to see happen is that if they don't get the grades that they deserve, they don't get the grades because they weren't able to focus properly, that they felt they were forced to do this because their whole future depended on it, which is a madness in itself, then we as a society have to do something about that and let them know that this is not their only shot in life. We will look after them. They are the future. Oh, and actually almost forgot. The reason why I mentioned the Towering Inferno and why I was watching it in the first place again is because I was thinking about Nicholas Paget Brown, Mr. Perceived Failings. He's actually set up a consultancy organisation, MVP Consultancy, where he's teaching authorities to, and get this, how to be green and to protect frontline services. And this is the joke of it all. He resigned. He didn't accept that he had any culpability because people were perceiving these failings, and now he's landed on his feet and is looking to tout his business to other local authorities. Any council that works with that firm, well, I'd probably be arrested by the new CPS guidelines on hate crime and social media. So I'm going to sign off as usual and say may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.